Subjects were drawn from a palette of divinities and personalities. We see this often in Indian stories. The same actor is used in different contexts. People have taken this literary device with very shallow understanding and said that Indian stories are full of myths and confused myths with so many variations we don't know what to believe. The reality is there is a story encoded in both of them, there's a wisdom encoded in both of them. The scholar needs to understand what that wisdom is. One should not reject ancient stories as myths because you lose sight of the fact that the ancients had intended to communicate knowledge in these stories. Our role is to try and understand what was intended to be communicated in those stories. So I say there are no such things as myths, only shallow, arrogant, ignorant readers. First of all, namaste to all our viewers from all over the world. I do observe some friends also who have joined in. I'd love to see you all over here. So let me get started. So first, always start with my pranams to the gurus, a whole lot of gurus who have been instrumental in illuminating the path for us, and my pranams to them before I start the talk. So the thesis of today's talk is that Indian pedagogy of the past was such that stories encoded ideas, morals, and wisdom. And we'd like to see, is there evidence of those of these claims, and what kind of wisdom did they encode? So at the very outset, if people ask, all right, you're saying that stories encoded knowledge, wisdom. What evidence do we have? Do you have any evidence at all? So it's nice to see some evidence of knowledge domain mapping. And for that, I'd like to call attention to a very recent, in the timeline that we're talking, this is recent, Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta, he had a mechanism where he had alpha syllabic numeral system. Basically, he took the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, the vowels which represent the powers and the consonants which represent the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next line will be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. And a syllable over here would acquire that power multiplied by this multiplier. So that was the nature of the words. For example, if you wanted to represent this huge word over here, 299 million, then working backwards over here by using these syllables, he's able to go back and say this is 299792458. So very, very easy to see how this kind of mapping was done. This is an instance where you take mathematical knowledge and convert it into a literary device. Basically over here, converting it into vowels and consonants and being able to talk about numbers in this context. One more in the Kerala, the Kattapayadi system. We know that this was popular for a very long time, maybe even from the 3rd century onwards. And we have evidence that Madhava, in the 14th century, he constructed the sign tables entirely by making use of this particular system of designing words. So this is one of two evidences that I'm pointing out from the 6th century and from the 14th century. And if one is interested in some more evidence, let's go to an even more earlier period, closer period, Playfair. Playfair in 1822, in his work Astronomy of Brahmins, he notices that the Brahmin seating himself on the ground and arranging his shells before him repeats the enigmatical verses that are to guide his calculation. And from his little tablet of palm leaves, takes out the numbers that are to be employed in it. He obtains his result with wonderful certainty and expedition, but having little knowledge of the principles on which his rules are founded, and to be better informed, he's perfectly satisfied if the eclipse occurs within a few minutes of his prediction. So here is an eyewitness, a drawing of astronomer. This is done by a French artist in the 18th century. Shows him seated on the ground in front of his house. This is a typical house of that era. He's got his shells over here. In his hand, you can see the palm leaves. So what this shows us from an eyewitness account is that formulas were versified. And these verses, he repeats some verses, and that will give him an index into the palm leaves. So he takes the palm leaves and sees the tables over there, and then he does his calculation. So once again, we see a similar kind of artifice over here, where wisdom has been encoded into verses into a different domain. And that different domain allows practitioners to use that wisdom. So rather than saying, if you want to do astronomical calculations, I want you to do a PhD in Nalanda or PhD in Takshashila, what would instead happen is they would say, here are verses. Anybody can learn these verses. And if you knew what these verses are and how to do these calculations, elementary arithmetic, you can do calculations of eclipses and so on. Very, very beautiful to see this proof emerge at us from history in various ways. So what were the methods, literary device, and who were the transmitters? We know that Kavya is an ancient Sanskrit literary style, and it evolved poetics of figures of speech like metaphors and similes and hyperbole and display of erudition, and had very complicated meters. All that applied to traditional subjects and themes derived from early popular epics. In other words, the Sanskrit verses that scholars were able to evolve or create that encoded a lot of information, and depending on how you decode that information, different contexts would emerge. So the mark of a scholar was the ability to encode terse statements which communicated this information. In today's world, we have some information, right? Just yesterday, I shared on Facebook about a PhD engineer who do dynamical system studies on the electrical power network and figure out algorithms to use and what to do if a disturbance hits it and so on. And those algorithms are reduced to steps which the operator can do. As far as the operator is concerned, all that they do is they say, all right, if this happens, I'll turn this valve or I'll turn off that valve and so on. He doesn't need to know about eigenvalues, system stability, and these things. That's too complicated. You need a PhD for that. All he needs to know is if that meter reads so much, this is what I will do. That's an algorithmic way of doing things. Similarly, today we see that a PhD biochemist, he might study, or he or she might study the pathways of COVID-19, for example. They know how it impacts the human cell, and perhaps they'll discover some drugs. These drugs are implemented by the general practitioner doctor. The doctor doesn't need to know what is the pathway. He doesn't need to know how the drug is going to stop that. All he knows is take this 3 times a day and you're going to be cured. So it's implemented by general practitioners. Similarly, our rishis and acharyas were the creators of knowledge. They used all these literary devices and they elaborately constructed, they understood, discovered truths, and they were able to encode it. They created knowledge, and that was implemented by practitioners. And these practitioners need not have known what were the methods of the rishis. To know what their methods were, you'd have to go to Nalanda, Takshashila, or so many other universities and sit with acharyas and then learn laboriously over many, many years what was intended to be communicated and learn that. So it's the equivalent of getting a PhD to understand why they did the things that they did. However, today we have formulas which we know if you use it, you can get information. Next, subjects were drawn from the palette of divinities and personalities. We see this often in Indian stories. The same actor is used in different contexts. Almost all of us are aware of the story of Ganesha, right? When Vedavyasa wanted to write the Mahabharata, he requested, he uses power of sannyasa, and he was able to get Ganesha to appear before him and requested him to write the Mahabharata, and they had a pact on how to do it. And in the process of writing, Ganesha had to break off his tusk and he had to continue writing the Mahabharata. So that is one story of how he became Ekadantaya. In a different context, when he ate so many sweets and Ganesha was walking on the road, he falls down and the moon laughs at him. So Ganesha is very upset that the moon is mocking him. So he breaks off a tusk and he throws it at the moon. So you see the same actor, and the object of the story is how he became Ekadantaya, but you see two different things happening. So people have taken this literary device with very shallow understanding and said that Indian stories are full of myths and confused myths with so many variations we don't know what to believe. The reality is there is a story encoded in both of them. There's a wisdom encoded in both of them. The scholar needs to understand what that wisdom is. Here is one more recent example from the 12th century, Bhaskara Leelavati. When he creates his mathematical problems, he draws upon the personalities in the epics. He takes angry Arjuna, took with him a bunch of arrows to kill Karna. Then he creates a mathematical problem and he asks how many arrows did Arjuna carry with him. So once again, you see a similar kind of artifice being followed. Okay, that is the background which I wanted to give to show there is evidence, if you look, that Indians employed the artifice of stories to communicate some wisdom. And again, one issue would be, how are we sure that these stories encode the wisdom that we are saying? That is something that we should debate and understand. It is our best understanding of what exists in those stories. So let me begin first with the story of Dhruva. All of us know about Dhruva, right? So Dhruva was pretty unhappy at home because his father had taken a second wife and he was treated pretty badly at home. So he leaves home at the age of 5 and he conducts severe penance. And at some point, Bhagavan appears in front of him and he asks him, "What do you want, Dhruva?" But Dhruva has now become wise after his meditation, penance. He's in a state of bliss. And he tells Bhagavan, "I want nothing." So Bhagavan is so pleased, he makes him into a motionless star in the sky. And he says that all the stars will go around you, including the revered Saptarishi will go around you. And we see that encoded. And what is that story really telling us? Basically, it is trying to tell us that Dhruva is the North Star, which is the pole star in the northern hemisphere, and the Saptarishi go around it. This is actually not a very good indicator. It happens all through the night. It goes through one rotation. It is not only in spring, summer, fall, or winter. It goes through course of 24 hours. It goes around this. So if you were to take your DSLR camera and point it to the north and take a few hours worth exposure after sunset, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see star trails. In these star trails, you see that the center thing that is not moving much is Dhruva. It is moving now because it is not exactly at the center of our axis of rotation, slightly offset. So you see that it is moving around a little bit. Then other stars, the ones closer to it, go in small circles. The ones that are distant go in larger circles. So this is what the ancients had observed and intended to communicate in the story of Dhruva. Next issue, how did ancient Indians mark the passage of time? All of us know about Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, right? This concept is known from Vedic times. It's mentioned in texts like Surya Siddhanta, for example. It's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Uttarayana refers to a 6-month northward course of the sun. Sun is coming more and more and north. In the process, in the northern hemisphere, we see longer and longer days. Dakshinayana is when the sun goes to the south for 6 months and we see longer and longer nights. Well, the Bhagavad Purana and the Srimad Bhagavatam have a story. It says Vrika, the Ashura, got a boon from Rudra that if he places his hand on a person's head, he wanted that person to die. Rudra grants him that boon. He says, "All right, you have the boon." And the minute he gets that boon, Vrika, the Ashura, what he does is he starts chasing Rudra because he wants to go and kill Rudra. He wants to put his hand on Rudra's head. So Rudra starts running from him. Then eventually there are several variations to the story, but in this particular variation, a divine maiden appears in front of Vrika. Vrika falls in love with the maiden and he wants to marry her. The maiden says, "You're an Ashura. What do you know about the arts? Do you know anything?" He says, "No, I can do whatever you do." So she says, "I'm going to dance and can you follow my dance steps?" So the maiden does her dance and Ashura, he also follows her steps. In the process of the dance, the divine maiden, she puts her hands on her own head and Ashura puts his hand on his own head and he dies. And the day he is killed is on Uttarayana. So what does the story say? Vrika is another word for the wolf. And we know the wolf is a nocturnal hunter. It hunts at night and sleeps through the day. Rudra, another, for the sun, another word one can use in literary device is Rudra. So it basically says that in the course of Dakshinayana, when the nights get longer and longer, Vrika the Ashura is chasing Rudra. Rudra is running away from him and darkness is predominating. Then on the day of Uttarayana, when Vrika is killed, then the sun gets longer and longer days. It's Uttarayana, northward course of the sun. So this story has encoded the phenomenon of Uttarayana and Dakshinayana in stories. So this follows with what we're saying. The earliest astronomical wisdom of the Indians was encoded in stories. The Siddhanta methods came later. Siddhanta methods are the mathematical astronomy that came later. So here is a picture that shows you what solstice and equinox. I'm not going to bother. Most people know this. I'm not going to say that. There are two more ways Indians mark the passage of time, the synodic and the sidereal months. So from new moon to new moon, it takes 29.5 days and we call it synodic month. Whereas there's another concept of lunar month where the moon comes back to the same nakshatra or the backdrop of the stars. In order to do that, the moon takes 27.3 days to come back to the same nakshatra. So one is from new moon to new moon or full moon to full moon is 29.5 days, synodic, and the sidereal. So reconciling between these cycles and the observed solar year gave us several insights. Excuse me, Adhika Masa, the different yugas, 5-year cycle, 19-year cycle, Samvatsara cycle, all the way to Chaturyuga cycle came by various synchronisms that we observed in the skies, and this is one of them. So we have a story that encodes knowledge of this month. This story says the moon spends a day in each wife's house. And the nakshatras are called the moon's wives, and there are 27 nakshatras. The fact that it spends one day is encoding this sidereal month story. There is also a story that encodes the synodic month, and we'll take a look at that. So what is the story of moon's wives? It says Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha, and these 27 daughters of the nakshatras that I've talked about extensively in my previous talks. I'm not going to bore you to death by talking about it. And these are the listing of all the nakshatra names and the principal stars. And to give you an idea of how old this model is, you observe that the nakshatra model is there in Sanskrit, in Telugu, in Kannada, Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Tamil, Malayalam, with little variation. Names are about almost the same. That shows you how widespread this nakshatra model is. And this, for example, is today's night sky here in Houston. Around 4 p.m. today, if you look at the horizon on the east, the moon will appear at around 4 p.m. And when it does so, it will be close to the Magha Nakshatra. Therefore, from 4 p.m. onwards, today will be the Magha Nakshatra. So this is just an understanding of how Indians mark the sidereal month. Each day, the moon will fall back and go to the next nakshatra, the next nakshatra, the next nakshatra, and so on. And this is how they mark the passage of time. So let's continue with our story. So we were talking about Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. By the way, this photo is something that I took from my telescopes. You can see the telescopes at the back, and I used that to take a picture of the moon, show all the craters and so on. So we are told that Chandra visited a wife every day, and I also pointed out that there's a story related to the 27.3-day sidereal month. However, this lovely picture was not as lovely as it seems, because his father-in-law, who was his father-in-law? King Daksha. King Daksha learned that Chandra loves Rohini, one of the nakshatras, more than the other nakshatras. And he was furious. How can you not treat my daughters equally? How can you favor only Rohini more than the others? And he was so mad at him that he cursed him. He said that, look, because of what you've done, you're going to die. And the minute he said you're going to die, Chandra was so perturbed, he ran to Mahadeva, and Mahadeva prayed to Mahadeva, please, I don't want to die. And Mahadeva gives him a boon. He says, you will not die. As you go towards, as you wax, you'll also wane. So waxing and waning will take place in your life, and you will not die. So basically it talks about how the moon goes through its phases. 29.5 days, the synodic month. So what we have seen here is the physical phenomena of the moon's appearance in each nakshatra was encoded in the story of moon and his wives. And the story of the synodic month is encoded in the fact that Daksha cursed Chandra and Shiva rescued him, and the boon was you'll go through a life of waxing and waning. So this is how ancient Indians use stories to encode some amount of astronomical wisdom. So in order to explain to you why Chandra loved Rohini more than the others, we need to understand the phenomenon of lunar occultation. Lunar occultation is when, from our perspective, when we're looking at the sky, sometimes the moon, if this is a star, this hand is a star, and this hand is the moon, and you're the observer, moon goes in front of a star. And when that happens, we say moon is occulting, it's a lunar occultation of the star. Sometimes the moon goes close to a star, but it does not occult it. So that's a nearby occultation and so on. Here is an example of a Kritika occultation on January 9th, 2006. These are the 6 stars of Kritika, and you can see that the moon is coming very close to this particular star. So it turns out that I had studied this when I gave a TEDx talk a couple of years back. If you look at this as an ecliptic line, ecliptic is a line on which the sun and the moon and others principal bodies seem to be going over. So that is ecliptic. Now, if you study the ecliptic and the distribution of the stars of the nakshatras around this, you'll find that some of them are more than 6 degrees away from ecliptic, some are between 6 and 4 degrees, some are less than 4 degrees. When these things happen, mathematically or even observationally, certain things happen. So when it is between 4 degrees and 6 degrees of the ecliptic, the principal star, it will experience 4-year series of occultations. Rohini is 5 degrees away from the ecliptic, so it means Chandra will occult Rohini in a 4-year series of occultations. If it is greater than 6 degrees, then that star is not going to be occulted by the moon. If it is less than 4 degrees, there will be 2 sets of occultations, and there's a 19-year periodicity. So the last great set of occultations were 2014 to 2018, and I counted about almost 50 occultations of Chandra with Rohini. In the previous cycle of Kritika's occultation, which I showed you in the previous page, Kritika was only occulted 25 times. So this gives us an idea of how the story has come about. The ancients in many 19-year periods have continually observed which nakshatras are visited by the moon more than the others, recorded that information, passed it on to the next generation, until such time it was fairly obvious to them that the moon appears to be touching Rohini more than the other nakshatras. So they encoded that into the story of the love story of the moon and Rohini. And you see how amazing it is. They encode an observational wisdom into story, and we remember that story even today. And if you know the story, you know that if somebody asks you, who is the moon going to occur the most, you know that's going to be Aldebaran or Rohini. So here is an example of an occultation of Rohini by Chandra. This is April 10, 2016 in Central Time. The occultation begins, and at 6:30 p.m. the occultation ends. So what I've done to you is I've given you some stories of ancient Indians and how they encoded some astronomical wisdom. I'd like to talk to you now about one more ancient story in 2 different cultures. This is the case of the missing 7th sister. So the 7 sisters in the Greek tradition are called the Pleiades. And the Pleiades, you can count in this picture over here, there are 7 of them, 7 Pleiades. These were the virginal companions of the goddess called Artemis. Artemis was a protector of virgins. So what happens is, one day, Orion, the great hunter, he observed the Pleiades at play and frolicking in a garden, and he became enamored by them. And he was a predator, right? So Orion started chasing the Pleiades. He wanted to possess them. And the Pleiades are greatly perturbed. Here is a strange man chasing us, and they ran here and there. And Artemis was extremely angry. She went to Zeus. Zeus is the head god. She said, protect my girls from this predator. So Zeus converts them into doves, and they fly into the sky. But still, Orion starts chasing the Pleiades in the sky also. Finally, Artemis gets a scorpion and gets that scorpion to kill Orion. Zeus, what does he do? He immortalizes both Orion and Pleiades as stars in the sky. And if you look at the skies in these months, right now, in fact, in the evening time, you'll find Orion is this huge constellation over here. And if you remember the Greek story that Orion pursues the Pleiades, then you know that the Pleiades are up ahead. The small thing over here are the Pleiades. So they appear first in the eastern horizon and set first in the western horizon, and they're closely followed by Orion. So what about the 7th sister? If you look at Pleiades today, you only find 6 of them are visible, though the Greek story says there are 7. The Greek story says Merope was the 7th one, and she had an affair with a mortal man. And in shame, she hid her face. And so you cannot see her. And she became the missing 7th sister. Now, excuse me, the story in the Indian context also on the 7 sisters. In the Markandeya Purana, he says Agni was officiating at the Homa. The Saptarishis had a Homa, and Agni was invoked over there. Agni looks at the wives of the Saptarishis and says, oh my God, these people are so lovely, and he's besotted by them. Then he feels totally ashamed of himself. What am I doing? And looking at somebody else's wife, and he goes off and does some penance. Swaha was his companion, and she had unrequited love for Agni. Agni was not too interested in her. However, she knew that Agni's got a weakness. He likes the Saptarishis' wives. So she does some deception. She takes on the forms of 6 wives of Saptarishi and she seduces Agni. The seventh sister was Arundhati, and she could not take her form because Arundhati was so pure and her form could not be replicated by Swaha. As a result, the six-headed Kartikeya or Skanda was born, and this caused great disturbance in the 3 worlds. And all the forest dwellers were so perturbed, they went to the gods and they complained. We saw Agni with the wives of Saptarishis, or who they thought were the Saptarishis, and they said this illicit romance is what has caused a disturbance in the world. Well, when the innocent wives heard this, they were so ashamed that they left the Saptarishis in shame and they became the 6 sisters, the Kritika. Now, what about the missing 7th sister? The missing 7th sister was Arundhati. And Arundhati is a binary star with Vashishta, and she remained with her husband Vashishta, and she's the missing 7th sister, whereas the remaining 6 became the Kritika Nakshatra. And here is the Saptarishis, and the names of Saptarishis over here, along with Vashishta, is Arundhati, a small binary star which you can't see. So this is the story of the 7 sisters in 2 different cultures. So now I said, stories encode the same personalities in different contexts. Here's an instance where across 2 different civilizations, the Greek civilization and the Indian civilization, had nearly similar stories about the same characters over here. Over there, the 6 girls were virgins and they were pure and so on and so forth. The 7th sister had an illicit romance with a mortal and she hid her face in shame. In the Indian context, all the wives were innocent. However, because of Swaha's deception, 6 of them were used in a form for this illicit romance. And the 7th pure sister remains with her husband. So these similarities in stories are what I'm investigating and calling out that there was outflow of Indian knowledge into various cultures at various periods of time, and similar artifices were used by other cultures also to encode some kind of wisdom into their stories. So I'd like to go from there to the story of Surya, Sanjana, Ashwinis, and this story is from the Rig Veda. So many of us have heard this. It appears in Markandeya Purana, Matsya Purana, Vishnu Purana, and so on. Sanjana was a wife of Surya. So she gave birth to the Ashwini Kumaras, and she couldn't bear the heat of Surya. Surya was too hot for her. So she fled to the cooler regions, assuming the form of a mare. So she took the form of a mare, disguised, and what did she do? She left her shadow. Her shadow was Chaya. She said, Chaya, please take care of my children because I can't take this heat anymore. I am running away from my husband. If he's in the northern hemisphere, I'm going to be in the southern hemisphere. That's where I'll be. So she ran away. Surya finds the deception that his wife has done. He knows Chaya is not his wife. And he asks her, tell me the truth. Where is she? And she says, she's hidden away from you and she's in the southern regions. And Surya goes, he takes the form of a horse also and goes to the southern region. So I'd like to use that to show the insight of a couple of famous archaeoastronomers. Ashwinis are mentioned 376 times in Rig Veda, several hymns to them, and so on. One of the hymns says that Ashwinis appear at dawn for their share of sacrifice. So I'd like you to remember that statement, along with the story that Sanjana went to the southern cooler regions for assuming the form of a mare, and Surya, he went over there. If Surya goes to southern regions too, that becomes hot, right? So basically, it turns out that, so it says that there were a couple of astronomers, archaeoastronomers, Abhyankar and Balagangadhar Tilak. They studied this phenomena and they said it refers to the heliacal rising of Ashwini. Basically, when Ashwini appears at dawn along with the sun, then it refers to that epoch. And that epoch turns out to be the winter solstice at Ashwini Nakshatra in 7200 BCE. Very, very ancient period of time. So sometimes the stories also enable us to call out the dates when the stories might have been created. And here is one instance where the story can be dated in one way by Abhyankar and Balagangadhar Tilak, using the story of Sanjana going to the cooler region, Surya following her. She has left her children, Ashwinis, back in the northern hemisphere, and they appear at dawn for share of sacrifice. Putting all these clues together, you can try to say that it was 7200 BCE. Then from that we go to the story of Rishi Agastya. So Agastya was the author of several verses of the Rig Veda. He's one of the Sapta Rishis, appears in Ramayana, Mahabharata, and several Puranas, and mentioned in the Tamil Sangam literature. So we all know there's a story of Agastya where he crosses the Vindhyas, tells the Vindhyas, you don't grow till I come back. And based upon that, there was a proposal by Abhyankar that this date has got to be 5200 BCE. I've talked about this in my talks earlier about the precession cycle and the visibility of Agastya in various parts of the country at various periods of time. There's one more story that talks about Agastya drinking up the ocean because the gods say there are demons living under the ocean. And can you please drink up the ocean waters so we can go and kill the demons? Agastya complies, drinks up the ocean water, and the gods are going, the devas are able to go and kill the demons. And after that, they say, look, the demons are killed, the world needs water, can you give your water up again? And Agastya refills the ocean. So this, I'm proposing, is the memory of the late glacial maximum when the ice ages were at a local minimum, about 12,000 years ago, during which most of the water was locked up in ice and the sea shore would have been visible to a large extent more than what it is visible today. And that probably ended about 7,000 years ago during the warming period when the waters once again reclaimed the visible shoreline. So this is probably encoded in the story of Agastya due to the fact also about the visibility of Agastya at various latitudes in southern India. I drew this picture from the latitude of Jaffna, as you can see over here, where it might have been possible to walk from India to Jaffna in those days. But as you go more and more towards the northern latitudes, the visibility of Agastya is more and more in question. That is the bottom line. And these curves, along with observation of these at the sea shoreline, allows us to date this to this time frame. Okay, so from that, I'd like to now go, I'm going towards the end of my talk over here. I'd like to talk about Vedic cosmology. It's very important because we'd like to understand how did ancient Indians describe creation. So we talk next about Vedic cosmology. And if I can close this. So for that, I'd like to call attention to the Rig Veda in this verse of Mandala 10, 129, Asadhya Sutta. It talks about a prediction. I call it a prediction because it says, while talking about creation, it says, even nothingness was not, nor existence, nowhere, nor heavens. What covered it? Where was it? Whose keeping? Was there cosmic waters? What is the depth of those waters? There was neither death nor immortality, neither night nor day, but the one breathed windlessly, self-sustaining. Then there was that one and no other. So it was a prediction which our ancients did to understand the nature of creation. Then they themselves went through a correction. In the correction, they said, after all, who knows? Who can say? Where did it all come from? How did creation happen? They was themselves are later than creation. So who knows whence it has risen? It says all creation had its origin, the creator, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not. Maybe even the creator himself does not know. In other words, the concept of creation was so scientific by the rishis of the ancient past that they were able to make a prediction and question that prediction, saying, is that hypothesis correct? Is it possible to see what has happened? Maybe nobody knows. Very, very interesting. Then in our understanding of cosmology, there's also a famous conversation between Yajnavalkya in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad along with a female rishi called Gargi. There's an evidence of very learned women in the ancient past. So Gargi goes and challenges Yajnavalkya on his knowledge of cosmology and the creation. She asks him a bunch of questions and challenges him. Can you answer my questions? And so to her questions, Yajnavalkya talks about the cosmology and he says, everything on earth is wrapped in water, water is wrapped in air, air is in skies and are wrapped in the world of planets, planets are wrapped in the world of sun, the sun is wrapped in the world of Chandra. I put it in red because the order, I think, should be reversed, though there are some people who think this is still correct. In the world of Chandra is wrapped in the world of Nakshatras, which are the stars that are still distant from us. In the world of Nakshatras, in the world of Devas, this is the metaphysical Devas in the world of Indra. World of Indra is wrapped in the world of Prajapati, which I'm calling out as a galactic center. The Milky Way is galactic center. the world of Prajapati, all the galaxies are wrapped in the world of Brahman. Such a beautiful, amazingly scientific way of looking at the order of cosmology from the smallest instance, which is Earth, mostly in water, all the way to entire universe existing as Brahman. Amazing instance of how an ancient rishi could understand the nature of the universe. I'd like to talk to you in cosmology about Brahma and the Hindu cyclical universe. We know that the classic cyclical universe of Brahma goes back to infinite past, where there have been many creation events, which we talk about here as a Big Bang, a Big Crunch, Big Bang, Big Crunch, and so on and so forth, happened for a long time. So how did Hindus see the cycle of time? If you look at Srimad Bhagavatam, it talks to you about Brahma's day and night. So it talks about the Chaturyuga. The Chaturyuga has got 4 yugas, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali, in 4:3:1 ratio. It adds up to 4.32 million years. One of these things adds up to 4.32 million years over here. 1,000 of them give rise to a Mahayuga, 71 of them give rise to Manvatara, 14 of them give rise to what they call one day of Brahma, in which creation is called forth. And this works out to do all the math over here. It comes to 4.32 billion years. And it also talks about the night of Brahma. During the night of Brahma, there is a dissolution once again, Pralaya, after which, after a period of rest, again Brahma calls forth the new creation. This is the Hindu understanding of creation and dissolution of the universe. And we have said that each Brahma lives for hundreds of Brahma years. We are currently in the 51st year of the current Brahma. So Stephen Hawking was asked, what was there before the Big Bang? Now, Stephen Hawking answered as honestly as he could. He said, that's a meaningless question. There's nothing over there. Big Bang is the origin of creation. And this fits in well with the Abrahamic worldview that there was a creation event, and that creation event gave rise to creation. Of course, Abrahamic say it happened in 7 days. But if you extend that to understanding of today's science, then it says that this is a creation event. However, ancient Indians, like I said, seem to have this consideration of time where there was forever this crunch and Big Bang has been happening and creation has been coming forth. That is what Indians talked about. And amazingly enough, this is a model that is contemplated in today's science, something called the Big Bounce model, in the recurrent creation and destruction, which says there was a pre-existing universe that collapsed due to gravity to a singularity. And that singularity once again gave rise to a new expansion event, and that gave rise to the universe as of today. I'd like to call attention to a famous cosmologist called Roger Penrose, not cosmologist as much as an astrophysicist. So he proposed in this paper apparent evidence for Hawking points in the cosmic microwave background sky. What he said was, if you consider the cosmic microwave background, he said he has found evidence of up to 30 anomalies in the background, cosmic microwave background. In trying to understand what that was, he called attention to the Hawking points, Hawking radiation, Hawking points, and so on, where there's a slow radiation out of black holes where energy dissipates slowly. So he said, when there's a maximum expansion of the universe, it goes through contraction phase. When the black holes are the last to basically lose the power or whatever, it goes to a singularity and gives rise to new Big Bang. And the black holes of the previous universe can be observed in our current universe as anomalies. And the question that we need to ask is, why don't we see similarity of the distribution of stars and galaxies in the sky? If the Big Bang was not influenced by anything, then the expansion should have given rise to a symmetrical universe. But we don't see symmetry. We see collections of stars and galaxies in some portions, and some portions are not so dense, and so on and so forth. And that is happening because today physicists say there's a very, very narrow tuning of the universal constants. And it is because of that life has become possible, laws of physics have been possible. But then at a loss to try and say, why did that happen? Roger Penrose tries to say that there was an initial condition to the expansion that is caused by the black holes of the previous universe that could have given rise to the asymmetry that we see today. So I'm asking the evocative question, the very provocative question rather. Does the universe have vasana? Vasana is a Vedic concept. It says that the habits that we form in this lifetime forms an impression on our Atman. And this impression follows us into the afterlife. So in the next birth, if one is, let's say, got a great talent for music or a great talent for eating or cooking good food or some talents, whatever, or studies or something, it is possibly because of a vasana, your atman, an impression from a previous lifetime. So I'm asking that question, does the universe have vasana? Because in our thinking, the universe itself is alive. It's an expression of Brahman, it's an expression of Brahma bringing forth creation and so on. So it's pretty nice to think that the universe is undergoing karma by the action of the black holes, and that karmic balance and the imprint is causing a new universe to take shape in a certain form. Very, very interesting to see it in that sense. Okay, from that I'll lead to the story of Brahma's concert. We can end the talk over there. I'd like to talk to you about Kakudni and his daughter Revati. So it turns out that Kakudni lived in a certain period of time, and he had a lovely, accomplished daughter called Revati. And she was an intelligent woman, and so on. And he tried to find a suitable match for her. He searched all over Earth. He couldn't find a good match for his daughter Revati. So he said, you know what? Let me go to the creator himself. The creator is Brahma. Let me go to Brahma and ask, have you made a suitable match for my daughter Revati? And if so, who is he and where is he? So off he went along with his daughter Revati, and they went to Brahma. And when they went to Brahma, it turned out that Brahma was listening to a concert. Gandharvas were doing a concert, and Brahma was listening there. And so they respectfully stand aside, waiting for the Gandharva concert to be over. Once the concert is over, Brahma motions to them to come forward. Why have you come here? And Kakudni says why he's come there. And when Brahma listens to that, he starts laughing. And he says, look, in the period of time you're waiting for this concert to be over, more than 27 Chaturyugas have passed on Earth. 27 Chaturyugas works out to 116.64 million years. So Kakudni obviously is very, very sad, and inconsolable. Brahma says, look, don't feel sad. You go back to Earth. By the time you reach your kingdom, it will be time for Bhagavan Krishna to have his next avatar on Earth. And he'll also have his brother Balarama there. Balarama is the correct match for your daughter Revati. And so Kakudni goes, that's the end of the story. But what I'd like to call out is the amazing fact that is encoded a notion of space-time over here in the story. And this is in this particular verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you take a look at where we are in our Milky Way is at the center. And if you draw a radius of 8 million light years, this is where our local group of galaxies are. You see this Andromeda galaxy and several other galaxies. This is where we are. This is nowhere close to 116.64 million years. Why am I saying this? Because Kakudni and Revati seem to have traveled at nearly the speed of light. Assume so, not saying they did. If they did, then they'd have experienced something called dilated time. Dilated time is when you go very, very close to the speed of light, time slows down for you. Apparent time, the mathematical formula is equal to true time divided by square root of 1 minus your velocity divided by the velocity of light squared. So that is the formula that we have from science, at least an approximate formula that says what is the apparent time that you're going to experience. So it turns out that he was experiencing dilated time by going at that speed of time. And we're using that notion to see if you have traveled about 116 million light years, where exactly was that boundary for that light year? It is not even in our galaxy over here. For that, we need to go to the notion of the Laniakea supercluster. So we are here in the Milky Way galaxy. We are the local group of galaxies. Around the local group of galaxies, the Laniakea supercluster, and we are somewhere perhaps over here. So this is a Vedic conception of the extent of Brahmaloka, that it thought that was about 116 million light years. It comes to this. This is far greater than any civilization could even conceive of, that the universe could have been that big. Today we have a different notion of how big the universe is. So we can also work out how long was Brahma's concert. If they say that each minute of Brahma's concert is 6 million Earth years, Kakudni spent so much of time listening to the concert, which means Brahma's concert took 19 minutes 26 seconds in dilated time. Very, very amazing. Now, I'm not trying to say that there was time travel in the past. I'm not trying to say that Kakudni and his daughter had a spaceship that could go at nearly the speed of light. No, I am saying the rishis who encoded this into a story, somehow, I have no idea how, they were able to encode the notion of space-time into a brilliant story. And by the way, this is not the only story that encodes space-time. We have at least 3 or 4 different stories that have a similar notion of space-time coming in. So that makes me say this is not a coincidence. There appears to have been some understanding of the ancient cosmology in the encoding of these kind of stories. So coming to my conclusion, so I showed that ancients used the mechanism of stories to transmit knowledge of Earth's rotation in the story of Dhruva, about the behavior of the sun, the moon, the equinox and solstice. We talked about the story of Dhruva and the Saptarishis. We talked about moon and the nakshatras. We talked about the love story of Rohini. We talked about the estranged story of Sanjana and Surya. We talked about Agastya. We talked about Vasana of the cosmos. We talked about Kakudni and the duration of Brahma's concert. So my takeaway line from this is that one should not reject ancient stories as myths, because you lose sight of the fact that the ancients had intended to communicate knowledge in these stories. Our role is to try and understand what was intended to be communicated in those stories. So I say there are no such things as myths, only shallow, arrogant, ignorant readers. Okay, with that, I come to the end of my talk. So thank you very much for your attention. So I think we can open it up now for questions.
Related to Rohini and its visiting, I wondered through your investigation if you found for example, is there an optimum separation of a nakshatra, like specific Yogatara, from the ecliptic that would lead to maximum number of occultations with the moon?
To the maximum number, yes. So that's what I was trying to say. So because of the passage of the moon is going through the ecliptic in a certain cycle. This cycle is 19 years, like I said. Its motion with respect to the ecliptic is around 19 years. It turns out that if that nakshatra is 4 to 6 degrees in the ecliptic, then the moon, in the course of passage through this chain, it occurs that particular nakshatra the maximum number of times. If it is between I think less than 4 degrees, what happens is it experiences 2 sets of occultations. One set is when the moon encounters a nakshatra in that 4 to 0 degrees. Then the moon goes on, and when the moon returns, it encounters a second set of occultations. So there are 2 sets of occultations, and that's what is happening to Kritika. Kritika is experiencing 2 sets of occultations over a 19-year period. Whereas Rohini is experiencing the complete 4-year set of occultations, and it appears that it has got the maximum. So I've not done it for every single nakshatra. I'd love to do it, but I really have not taken Yogatara and tried to see for Chitra, for other nakshatras, what is the number of counts. From the available information from almanacs and from my own observation of Rohini over 2014-18, and the available astronomy almanacs for Pleiades, Kritika, I was able to see there were 26 occultations of Kritika in the past occultation time, and this many with Rohini in this period of time. I hope that answers your question, Nileshji.
Yes, thank you. And thank you. That's good.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good evening, sir. Sir, I just wanted to know that is there any story that relates that we have parallel world and we can, time travel horizontally and not vertically? Like on the same earth, we cannot time travel vertically. Rather, we will be, time traveling to some other planet where the time is, different. Is there any such story, and what are the chances of this? Like there is a story which is written by Jayant Narlikar, which we study in grade 12 also. So it talks about that. So is there any story that relates to our, scriptures?
Okay. So if there is, the reality is I'm not aware of it. However, there's a lot of things we don't know about our own past. We had in recent times a rishi who lived with us, and his name is P.V. Vartak. Vartak, not many people in India know about him, but he was an amazing person who, towards the end of his last days, he passed away recently. Towards his last days, he was a very, very spiritual man and a practitioner of yoga. So he said he was able to do astral projection of his, we can call it mind, Atman, or body, or something onto different planets. He was able to go to Mars even before the Viking landed there. In that period of time, he came out with a white paper calling out 50 observations he made on Mars before NASA reported after Viking landed, Viking 1 and 2 in 76 or so, landed there and made his observations. He also called out that Viking 1 will experience some difficulties when it lands over there. And NASA did not report that. It's only after the landing they called out those difficulties. I look back on this with shock and amazement, and I'm not very surprised, because I ask myself, how did our rishis know these things? Again and again, I find evidence of a highly advanced knowledge system in the past, whereas we don't have archaeological finds of spaceships, we don't have archaeological finds of high instrumentation and so on. So where did they get that knowledge from? We don't know a lot of things about the working of our mind. We don't know a lot of things about how the rishis might have tapped into this knowledge system. We don't know whether they would have been able to project themselves and maybe actually see some of these things happening on other worlds. Now, I think the emphasis is there is a lot that we don't know. So I don't want to dismiss something out of hand saying that, no, that's not possible. Neither do I know for myself or have evidence that such things have been done. It does not mean that there isn't. So I would like you, for example, to share your knowledge of stories that you have read about these things, so that other researchers can also study them and understand what is contained in the stories. I hope that answers your question, Vinitaji.
The question is, sir, there is an incident or story mentioned in Mahabharata where Dhritarashtra asked Sanjay that how the world looks from space. It is two people, leaves, and a rabbit.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but maybe you can still comment on it.
Yes, I have read that, and maybe Nilesh can help out with that also. I have not seen the original verse where Sanjay describes this particular one, that a rabbit sees, he looks at that and so on. But it certainly is showing us that somebody had a perspective from a high up view. And the same thing comes out even in Ramayana, right? Like when after the war is over, Rama comes back in the Pushpaka Vimana along with Sita, and he's calling out the topology as he flies over, and he's able to call out fairly accurately as an aerial traveler might be able to see the Earth. It's not possible from the perspective of the ground to call out these things. It's not even possible if you go to the top of a big mountain and look down and you can call out some of these things. You had to be at some kind of a height and some kind of a motion to have seen that. So there are a lot of interesting anecdotes like this in our epics where we don't have clear answers. We are not ready to project backwards and say that they had this kind of knowledge system. At the same time, we cannot close our eyes to the anecdotal evidence that we have. We need to continue investigating and see where the truth is. I'd like to give one example over here, Rahul. In the Mediterranean Sea, some time back, they dredged up the artifact, and that is called the Antikythera. That is an elaborate mechanism that seems to have X-rays. You know, after so many years, thousands of years in the ocean water, the salt has eroded, the brass has gone crazy and all that. However, with X-rays and such things, we're able to reconstruct what was it all about. It seemed to have bunches of dials arranged with gears in certain ways, and there's a speculation that it was used to predict the movements of the heavenly bodies into the calendrical kind of system. So this is one of the rare devices that we have found from an ancient past that shows an advanced engineering device. How many more like this can be there that we are not found? Now, I'm not saying there are, but the appearance of one such device opens up our mind that our engineering and our understanding of technology is not very recent, but maybe from a very ancient period of time, such things have been there. So, bottom line, there are more questions than answers. We have got a lot of anecdotal pieces of evidence, various places. We are not ready to make a projection saying this is what the reason is for that. It is something that must make us continue researching, continue trying to understand what was there in the past.
Wow, thank you. So Murugesan SG is asking, send me a private question saying, Sri Yukteswar Giri says total Yuga cycle is consisting of 24,000 years.
Right.
Here, the Yuga cycle you mentioned is in millions. And I
Right.
know Yuga is a constant question which is brought up to Nilesh as well. Now there are different views. I know Sadhguru has come up with his own version of Yugas. So there's a lot of confusion around this.
Correct. So this is perhaps one of the great questions of Indian civilization. What is the Yuga? And how did these various notions of Yuga come from? Are these really millions of years old, or are they just a few thousand years old? So Yukteswarji, so he proposed that the Chatur Yuga system should be fit into the 24,000 year cycle of precision. He basically looked at the precision cycle, and he said that refers to one divine day. And so he wanted to divide that into the 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And on the basis of that, he said that we are on an ascending, the Kali Yuga is over, the ascending Kali Yuga is over, and we are now in the next Yuga system, ascending towards Satya Yuga. And from there, once again, we go. It's a big cycle. He saw this as happening in big cycles. That was his understanding of the Yuga system. And whether that is the truth or not, I don't think we should say that. Like I said, the artifices used in ancient India were to use the same phenomenon to address different aspects for different reasons. There are some people who say, Aryabhatta, he was the one who talked about this huge Yuga cycles. It appears in Surya Siddhanta also. And the reason why they did that was to get a precision in arithmetic computation. Because when you're talking about the number of cycles that the sun or the moon or heavenly bodies has done from a period of time which they refer to as Kali Yuga, the 3102 BCE time frame, then the numbers become so exceedingly large. To maintain accuracy, they said they had these huge numbers and huge Yuga cycles to accommodate these things. There are some people who say that. There are some people who say, like Yukteswar, that it is precision cycle. And there are some other people, whatever fits a certain reality, they try to say that. I don't think we have a clear understanding of any of these things. Our definitions come from several places. Srimad Bhagavatam, it comes from Surya Siddhanta, it comes from Aryabhatiya. Was it there earlier? It could have been. I have no idea. Was Surya Siddhanta updated by Aryabhatta? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it came from earlier time frames. If you look at Nileshji's talk, Surya Siddhanta is a pretty ancient one. It goes back to a very ancient period of time. I've talked about Anil Narayanan's work and how he talks about the age of Surya Siddhanta in a certain time frame. Nileshji is taking it back even further. So we know that there's a corpus of work that was added and layered on by various rishis and acharyas over time as their knowledge systems grew. And so what we have received today is a recension that has happened at some recent period of time with the whole body of knowledge added on to the corpus of ancient works. We have evidence of that. The Chitra observation that Anil Narayan is talking about, the 8,000-year-old observation in Surya Siddhanta. Whereas the trigonometry in Surya Siddhanta seems so modern that some people are saying that Aryabhatta perhaps did that. Well, people who say that are trying to recourse to the Aryan invasion theory. Indian knowledge came from Greeks. Ptolemy's knowledge was adopted by Aryabhatta. This is rubbish. But Surya Siddhanta itself says that there were 18 Siddhantas before it. 18 Siddhantas which we don't have. And Siddhantas are mathematical texts. And we don't know how ancient they were. Were they 1,000 years old from Surya Siddhanta's time? 2,000, 10,000? We don't know. But there's a gradual growth of knowledge systems. So what am I trying to say by all this? The notion of Yuga has been used by different people for different purposes and reasons. We cannot understand why. Our best evidence comes from Srimad Bhagavatam that talks about it, comes from Surya Siddhanta that talks about it, it comes from Aryabhatta that talks about it. Are there earlier works? Like I said, maybe. So that's an open question. I don't expect to answer that, and I don't think anybody can say with certainty, this is the answer, there's no better answer. there is only more and more evidence that builds up towards a particular answer. I hope that addresses that question.
Thanks. So I have a question. This is regarding the story of Brahma chasing and trying to marry or rape his own daughter and stuff like that. This is all Hindu-phobic people, and in Muslim groups you will find these kind of stories mocking Hinduism. Do you have is there an anecdotal whatever on the same story?
I did not include that because of these particular reasons, because there's a propensity by shallow, arrogant, ignorant readers to quickly take away the whatever they want and run with that ridiculous notion without even making an attempt to understand what is the deeper meaning contained over here. Ancient Indians observed that the vernal equinox position is changing over time. If they had a calendar that started at a certain nakshatra, that was changing over time. They were trying their best to understand why is that changing. And so the age, the star, the nakshatra that needs to be at the beginning of a certain, either a Uttarayana or the equinox position, or whenever they call the new year, that had to be the same, but they were observing it as changing. And the reality is it changes at around 50 seconds per year. 50 seconds, and that adds up to about 25,700 years for 360 degrees. That is a precession cycle. So because of precession cycle, they were observing that the calendrical systems had to be changed from time to time. And one of them was a passage from the Mriga Nakshatra to the next Nakshatra. That story was encoded, the precession phenomenon in observational wisdom was encoded in the story of the Mriga Nakshatra, where Prajapati was said to be in pursuit of his own creation. His creation was Rohini, in pursuit of Rohini. The gods saw that and said, that is not okay, what you're doing. So Rudra came, the hunter. So he took a spear with the 3 stars, a belt of Orions like a spear, or an arrow, and then he killed Prajapati so that he will not chase his own daughter. It was basically the death of an earlier calendrical system, because precession has required you to go on to a new calendrical system. So this was encoded in the story of Orion, and this story appears in various cultures in various ways, because like I said, there's a transmission of knowledge, transmission of understandings from India happening. So you see similarities in other cultures also. In the Indian culture, the story of Orion, which is the Mriga Nakshatra, is related to Rohini. It is related to the Adra Nakshatra, and all of these things have got a bearing on the relative positions in the sky and the fact that the calendrical system has changed due to precession. So this is our understanding based on the reality of what we are seeing. We are seeing this happening again and again when the list of stars, the nakshatras have changed, which is the first nakshatra that has changed. Again, with time it changes. This is because Indian rishis were trying to deal with the effects of precession that happens over thousands of years. Not over the lifetime of one rishi, but over thousands of years it's going to happen. So like I said, 25,700 years, it is done one full circle. Our pole star started from Dhruva, Dhruv today, all the way to Abhijit and all the way back to Dhruv. So this is an enormous passage of time. And Indians have had to deal with that in the calendrical systems. And so these stories are encoded to help people to understand the system has changed. It is apparent that there are stories that in different cultures talk about the passage of time, and the change of calendar systems, which were pegged to the stars, in this case, the moon's passage to the nakshatras. As a consequence of precession, they needed to be changed. The story of Orion falls precisely over there.
Question by Nikunji. The story of Gargi and Yagnavalkya mentions of Akshar. Is that Akshar different from Brahman?
What is that? What is different from Brahman?
Is that Akshar different from Brahman? I didn't
get. Can you spell what that was? This is what I've written over here.
So that story in the so Gargi and Yagnavalkya when talking about, Yagnavalkya mentions about etasyava aksarasya prasasane Gargi. So there mentions the word as Akshar. So I was just wondering, like there are different darshans that we have in our philosophy. So is that Aksar, the word that's mentioned here, is that different from Brahman, or like they are a synonym?
It's a good question, and I'm not qualified to answer that. I'm so sorry that I'm not qualified to answer that. So this is my best understanding of this particular dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Gargi. So in the precise interpretation of a certain word, whether it refers to Brahman or something else, like you say, depending on the darshana that you're using, you may have a different take on that one. So, but I'm not qualified to answer that. So sorry about that.
So there is one which says, do we know if there has been any knowledge that has survived between one big crunch to another? What is the rough time period of such a cycle? I'm not sure how we would.
Okay. I see this question from Ami.
Ami.
Do we know the knowledge survived from one big crunch to the other? What is a rough period of time for one such cycle? Excellent question. This was asked to me by somebody else too when I talked about this concept. What do the Hindu scriptures say? Hindu scripture says Narayana. Narayana is the constant. It's the constant across every epoch. It's timeless. It's timeless and eternal. And the allegory says from the navel of Narayana, Brahma comes on the lotus. Lotus is the symbol of purity, right? The dirt does not stick to the lotus. So he comes on a lotus, Brahma comes. And Brahma, in his lifetime, he calls on creation, pralaya, 100 years, and he's gone. Next Brahma comes and so on. So between a creation and a dissolution, the constant is Narayana. Because it is from Narayana's navel that a new Brahma comes in. And a new Brahma calls forth creation and dissolution. So the Hindu understanding has been that the sum total of knowledge systems is a constant in Brahman. Brahman is a stand-in here for Narayana. And so the knowledge transmission, yes, the knowledge is in the context of Narayana. And in the context of Narayana, creation is coming. This is our understanding. But in the context of Western understanding of Big Bang and Big Crunch, what is being proposed by Roger Penrose is that the black holes of the previous universe are appearing as anomalies in the cosmic microwave background of the present universe, and therefore there is some knowledge that's come from the previous universe to this current universe. If there's no knowledge, then you cannot find these anomalies. So certainly there's been some knowledge that has come from the previous universe, and I called it out as Vasana. I said that's probably Vasana. So a rough time period for one such cycle, and that too is a good question. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Our understanding looking at the red shift, the blue shift, red shift is that the universe probably had a creation time about 13.8 billion years ago. This is our understanding based upon the galaxies proceeding, and Hubble was the one of these things. So we don't know if the expansion will continue forever. What is expansion? All galaxies are flying away from each other. And some people are proposing it's because of dark matter, which we cannot see, the impact of dark matter and so on, or whatever. Some kind of energy is pulling these things apart and they're going in all. Stephen Hawking also considered this possibility. Will there be a maximum expansion after which the galaxies will come together under the power of gravity and eventually go into a big crunch? There is no consensus in the scientific world. These are all conjectures. Nobody knows whether the fate of the universe is ultimately expand and expand and expand, and we finally lose sight of all the stars, we meaning our remote descendants, whatever species they'll become 1 billion years ago, if they survive the sun's onslaught or whatever, maybe not 1 billion, but many, many billions of years later, maybe there'll not be stars in the sky because they've gone away so distant from each other that even the light from that does not come to us. Is that the fate? Or is the fate that maximum expansion will be reached and contraction will start? Nobody knows. There are cosmological constants that people can tune in their simulation models, and they propose either this eventuality or that eventuality. Astrophysicists constantly look for evidence. They constantly go out there, measure various things in the skies, in the space, and try to refine their cosmological models to understand creation and to understand what the fate of the universe is. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The Hindu philosophy, knowledge systems have said it very clearly. Brahma's day, Brahma's night. and it adds up approximately 8 to 10 billion years. And there's a period of silence also when Brahma brings up the next creation. So about 10 billion years. So it is difficult for us to see because we are already 13.8 billion years. So there's no dissolution here. But the questions can come, right? Is the year the same thing as we understand it today? Today, the year has got a meaning that when the Earth goes one revolution round, the sun comes to the same point, that is a tropical year. That is our understanding. But about 4 billion years ago, the Earth was much closer to the sun and whipped past the sun much quicker. The day and night were shorter. They were shorter by almost 10 hours to so on. So if the day and night were shorter, that means the concept of year also is different. I hope you can see the concept of a year and time is not constant. If you go back further and further in time, these notions change. Earth is pulling away from the sun at approximately less than a foot every year, approximately. So eventually it will go so far that its orbit will take longer and longer. Concept of a year will change. So when we go back to the distant past and say 13.8 billion years, there's a notion of calibration. What do we mean by this time? So a lot of questions. I don't have an answer for you. Lots and lots of interesting questions come from this question of has knowledge survived from one big crunch to the other.